If I were to ask you what you think of when it comes to 80s horror movies, some of you might say things like being low quality, having cheesy moments, heinous effects, and a weird amount of nudity. But what if I told you these were factors that actually made these movies unforgettable from their time? As a kid growing up with a fair amount of media from the 1980s, whether that be watching Ghostbusters or listening to music from then, you're eventually guaranteed to stumble upon the horror movies of the 80s. Even then, if you're someone my age who didn't grow up with anything from that decade, you've probably seen references or photos online of tons of media from 80s horror. Almost everyone by now should know about Jason Voorhees, the hockey mask-wearing antagonist of almost all of the Friday the 13th series. Other familiar characters may ring a bell, such as Freddy Krueger, Pinhead, Chucky, Michael Myers, and even the Evil Dead protagonist, Ash Williams. Whether you were born and raised throughout the 80s, or if you've lived past that decade, 80s horror movies have not only been a staple to modern media, but have also left a solid impact on the movie genre itself. This video will not only reference some of that media, but will also view my opinion, I repeat my opinion, on why I think the 80s were such a great period for horror movies. I'll try to split it into sections for each reason and explain as best as I can, so sit down and prepare to hear me talk about what makes 80s horror so iconic. Now, before I really get started, I just want to say this video is, like I just said, entirely my opinion. I'm not saying that all 80s horror is perfect or iconic, and I'm not dogging on any horror before or after the decade. I'm simply stating my opinion on why I find it so memorable. I'm not claiming to be a professional know-it-all. After all, I'm just a random dude. So if you agree with anything I say, sweet. If you don't, that's alright, but don't lose your mind over it. By the way, just a quick little spoiler warning. I'm probably going to be talking about things that happen in some of these movies that could be clear spoilers. So just know, I don't really have specific movies listed in the title or anything, I guess. But just be aware that you could get spoiled. So just keep that in the back of your head or something. Also, I just want to say this video is not going to be me analyzing every single horror movie of the 80s, because there's just way too many movies for that. And I also haven't even really seen that many. I'm really just doing this over kind of more well-known movies of this time, and ones that I've seen and experienced watching. So sorry if you were expecting this to be an analyzation video of every single movie. I just don't really have time to be doing all that. So I'm just kind of overall clumping these movies together and kind of forming my opinion on it. So with all that out the way, let's get started. Let's start with something obvious. The quality of almost everything in the 80s appears to be grainy, dark, and what some would say overall cheap looking. However, just because this may be the case for some films, in a way this almost makes these movies that much better because of it. When it comes to movies today, we've gotten well used to the clearest cameras showing every detail, perfect lighting, and intricate camera angles. Although this may sound nice, the way a movie's quality looks can really affect not only the appearance, but also the feel of the film. Don't get me wrong, seeing a whole bunch of grain on screen can be distracting at first, but it almost helps set the mood for what you're about to watch, whether that be for spooky purposes, or just nostalgic inducing. When something is lower quality nowadays, it can be seen as cheap and unwatchable. However, unless you're trying to spot Bigfoot on camera, it's sometimes better to have that older style. Today we've reached a point where everything has to be perfect quality down to each frame, pixel, and sound. This makes most media today seem very similar and almost repetitive in a way. Even if the quality can be rough to look at, technology today has allowed some movies and even music videos to be watched in these clear conditions. So that's a point for modern day stuff, I suppose. However, sometimes it's okay to have that rough, old look to it because it helps tie in with the next point. Looking back at how 80s horror movies were, they did a good job at putting you into that scary movie feeling. Although we can see movies today still doing this pretty well, something about 80s horror just stands out to me with its atmosphere. If we focus on quality first, this can be a key factor as to why we might feel on edge while watching. Today being so used to perfect quality, it's almost uncanny to see something that isn't crystal clear and easy on the eyes, as well as not having obvious studio lighting constantly, and keeping the camera at angles it was limited to. These things really help with getting you into the movie. For me, when I'm watching some of these movies, it almost makes me feel like, in a way, I'm there. Not to sound like a pick-me cornball, but there's definitely something about modern horror media that just immediately makes me feel like I know it's not real. This may sound confusing, but say for example you're watching a horror movie, wanting to get scared. If the movie I'm watching constantly has moments where the camera is doing some crazy drone flip tricks or something like that, I'm going to remember that I'm obviously watching a movie. And immediately, I'm not going to be scared because I know it's fake. There's something about 80s horror that almost can feel real and make you interested in watching instead of just sitting on your phone with it playing in the background. To me, I'd say that quality plays a huge part in this. When you go from something so clear and obvious to what you're seeing to something dark and grainy, it really helps build a feeling almost like you're watching something you shouldn't, or something you're not entirely sure about. The reason I say it can feel like you're really there when watching the movie is heavily based on these factors. Having dark lighting, regular camera angles that aren't flying all over the place, and grainy quality, it can feel as if you're really standing wherever the movie is and seeing what's going on, rather than feeling like you're just looking through an obvious movie camera on set. I'd also like to talk about the almost forbiddenness of watching these movies that helps make you feel on edge. Taking a brief look at the world in the 1980s, horror was somewhat just starting to increase its fame and the youth's attention after movies like Psycho, Black Christmas, and of course, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. These movies would be horror staples of the 70s, of course using the 1960 film Psycho as a lot of inspiration. And I mean, everyone knows the shower scene from that film. I'm just playing, here's the real scene. Soon the 80s followed with movies like Friday the 13th, Evil Dead, and A Nightmare on Elm Street to help boost the attention drawn to the genre. During this time, parents and religious people were beginning to think against showing horror movies as they'd see it as a way of satanic worship. Yep. They didn't want these films warping their children's minds. So, in the UK, they started the video nasties, which dropped and got rid of films deemed too violent. I know one example of these films is called like The Driller Killer, and I mean that just sounds cool. And they just pretty much got rid of it. Meanwhile, in the US, they try censoring a ton of stuff. This really, to me, just kind of sometimes messed up horror movies, especially some of the Friday the 13th films. I know for sure you can almost tell that they just had to cut so many of the kills and literally just kind of make them boring because of all this censorship stuff that companies and producers and things like that wanted to do just so they wouldn't get the most insane rating, which I can maybe understand if you want to keep a more varied audience so you end up making more money overall. But with horror movies, I don't know. I know today, it's just kind of sad that you can tell they've really let up on those censorship things, but back then you could tell it was kind of unfair that they had to deal with that. This would also connect with metal music and the satanic panic, as parents and religious groups would assume the worst of metal being a form of satanic worship and rotting the youth's minds. Now, I can maybe see this from some bands, but as a metal listener myself, that's definitely far from the truth, of course. Some parents just didn't want to be cool or have cool kids. However, because of the amount of attention horror was getting and how much parents wanted censored, it led to horror being a almost forbidden thing. The genre would start ramping up the amount of kills and gore in films, focusing mostly on teens being killed off. The outrage and concern parents would show would only lead to their kids wanting to watch these movies more. Think of a typical curious teenager mindset. Your parents say that something is bad to watch, yet that only makes you want to watch it more. It's like how curiosity killed a cat, except the cat doesn't actually die, but watches other cats die instead. Which, I mean, I'm sure that doesn't sound like the best thing, but it's like, the other cats dying aren't actually real, and, so I guess it's not as bad, honestly. With how sensitive the world was to this change of horror into metal music, it was almost expected for kids to rebel against their parents and prove them wrong. In today's world, it's super easy to be exposed to actual gore and violence online, so it really ruins that sense of innocence people had back then. When you haven't seen people getting killed or hunted by a maniac killer, it can really be a sudden change when going to watch a horror movie in the 80s. With a simple Google search today, people can find all sorts of stuff that's much worse than fake kills in movies. So it ruins that feel of seeing something you shouldn't, since you've probably already seen a cartel beheading video beforehand. This leads me perfectly to my next point. Comparing today's media to the 80s shows a major indicator of difference. Because of social media and other sources online, you can pretty much spoil an entire movie for yourself, accident or not. Thanks to places such as TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, you can find out anything you need about a movie without having to watch it. This immediately ruins the unknown factor in a horror movie, which at times can be one of the most exciting parts about watching it. If you know what to expect and everything that happens, then it loses all of its scare factor. Looking back at the 80s, if I'm correct, there wasn't a whole lot of media that spoiled the movies. You'd pretty much just have the movie trailer and the movie poster at theaters. That was practically all you knew about the movie, unless there was a news article about it or something in the newspaper. But who reads those anyway? My point is, you'd only know about a movie if you happened to have the TV on at the time they wanted to show the trailer, or if you were at a movie theater. Other than that, you pretty much had no idea about the film unless word of mouth spread in person. This keeps that unknown sense that can set the viewer on edge because they actually don't know what they're getting into. Overall media today has definitely had more of a negative impact on the way we view these movies, especially now that everything seems to only be watchable if it has a good rating. Otherwise, it's supposedly not worth it. Now don't get me wrong, having the internet and social media today does have its benefits, and I'd for sure struggle without it in life. However, it's one of the main reasons horror just doesn't hit the same as it did back then. Mostly thanks to reviews, spoilers, and things that explain it without having to even watch the movie. One of the only exceptions can be YouTube somewhat, since you're kind of the one spoiling the movie by choosing the video you watch. You don't have to only watch videos that spoil movies. That's your choice. I gotta make sure that's clear, of course, so people don't think I'm hating on the kill count. That channel is awesome no matter what, and I still watch their videos knowing it'll spoil a movie because they're just that good. So, shout out to the kill count. It's more social media like Instagram and TikTok that can kind of just randomly have spoilers pop up. That's about most I could think of media-wise, and I'm sure I missed a bunch of other details, but I just tried to highlight the obvious differences. Now here's a huge difference with almost all movies today, especially horror compared to back then. Practical effects. 80s movies not only had a realistic feel to them due to the quality, but also due to the fact that it technically was real. When it comes to using practical effects, movie creators would actually try to make whatever it is they were wanting to create. That's why so many kills and creatures look scarily accurate and realistic, because they actually made them. In the modern day of movies, most films changed from the realistic practical effects to a supposed better alternative, CGI. CGI, or computer-generated imagery, is pretty much everything you see in all the bad Marvel movies. It's meant to be used for things that are really difficult to actually make, such as some of the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. However, a decent amount of movie companies now use it for basically every effect, even ones that could be done by hand. This is a very obvious difference when comparing movies from today to the 80s, and it really just makes movies today kind of suck. It doesn't feel nearly as real, and you can almost always tell if a film is using CGI or not. If you ask me, it should stick to being used for things you can't possibly create. And then anything else you can make should all be practical effects. And I mean anything you can make. Sure, it might take longer and cost more for materials, but if studios actually cared for the movies they were making, they'd do more than just slap some obvious fake effects on. I can maybe understand some effects not being used since they might have changed the ways movies are made since then, such as like hand-drawn effects or lightning and stuff. That always looks sick, but I haven't really seen it done much in recent films. Other than that though, we really need to bring back practical effects. I mean, it looks so much better in films, horror or not. I'm going to put up some examples here. First are going to be some moments from the 1988 film Night of the Demons.
Oh, there you are. I was just warming my hands in the fire.
I mean, they literally had her hands on fire. Is that not, like, cool, at least? Even if it's, like, you know, it's not real, but it's like, it looks real. And that's literally the whole entire point of it. It looks real, and that's what makes it freaking just look so awesome.
Stop looking at me.
Now, could some of them be considered goofy looking effects? Maybe so. But even then, it still looks better than CGI. I mean, they literally lit they lit people on fire. And I don't know for sure if anyone didn't get burned or not, but that looks so cool, man. It's not just some fake CGI flames that just freaking fart out of the pipe or whatever. It's real. It's actual fire. I don't know, guys. This is literally practical effects are just awesome. And next are some examples from the 1982 film Friday the 13th. And I mean, oh my goodness. Look at Jason unmasked here. Dude, could you imagine if this guy came running at you after you literally slammed an axe into his head and he's still running at... I mean, oh my... No thank you, man. No thank you. And finally, here's an example from the 1985 film The Return of the Living Dead. All the creatures and effects shown in those scenes were handmade, and they look sick in the best way possible. Could you create all of those with CGI? Sure, but it won't feel nearly real enough for a horror movie to make the audience crawl in their skin while watching. Not only did these effects tie in with the way they helped make movies feel realistic, but they also tied into the overall quality of a movie, and how much effort the creative team wanted to put into making everything look believable. One of the things I brought up in the beginning of the video was about how 80s horror movies can come off as cheesy. This can be apparent with the decent amount of characters in these horror films. Another thing I brought up was a weird amount of nudity. Here's the thing. These movies were made however long ago, and since then tons of things have changed. Such as slang people used, the way everyone dressed, and what jokes were considered funny. Sure, sometimes characters can be cheesy and cornballs, but in a way that's almost how they're written. I mean, if we're talking about slasher films, most of these characters are stupid and only care about partying and getting laid. Of course they're gonna sound dumb. You don't go to a party to speak Shakespeare, do you? And if you do, good for you. I'm sure you get all the babes. The way I see it, most of the things that make these movies seem cheesy are more staples of the 80s in a way, and probably done on purpose. After all, most slasher films didn't really care much for a story, so why make everyone sound like Einstein just for them to die straight after? It just makes sense to have most characters be the way they are. Sometimes, simpler is better. Now, for the absurd amount of nudity, that I don't really have an answer for. However, I will say it does help with giving the movie that forbidden feeling I mentioned earlier in the video. It's not every day you see a random pair of boobs out and about on the movie screen, at least not for me. It could have been used as a way to draw more attention in order to get people, or at least freaky people, to watch the movie. Again, it depends on the movie. Most of the time, slashers have the occasional nip slip, and sometimes more. But like I said, it does add to the feeling of hey, I shouldn't really be watching this, huh? Plus, it makes the movie not kid-friendly, so then it's more fitting for older people to watch. After all, if a kid is allowed to watch a horror movie, then surely it's not going to be that scary. Or at least you can assume that. But with nudity in the mix, it helps prevent the movie from seeming kid-friendly, which definitely wasn't the case in the first place, but still, you never know. Another thing some negative Nancys may say is that most characters in 80s horror movies are stupid and get killed very easily. Although this can be seen with most characters, especially, of course, the ones that die in the movies, 80s horror actually helps solidify the final girl trope that can be seen in horror movies today still. I think one problem with most films today is that they try way too hard to make characters all tough and fearless, that it just looks bad and corny. Final girls in the 80s feel a lot more real and likable, in my opinion, due to the fact that they weren't all fearless and brave. Even though they're usually fighting back against the killer, they're still scared for their life, which is accurate in a scary situation. All that adrenaline and stuff would let you be able to get the strength to fight back somewhat, and run like crazy, of course. They shouldn't be all bad B-mode saying a bunch of crappy one-liners unless they purposely want the characters to seem like that. So, although some of these characters may be cheesy and dumb, 80s horror does a great job at making protagonists that fight back and make you want them to win.
Don't mind the sudden change of quality on my audio. I'm recording this on my phone because I just completely forgot to put other stuff in my script, and I kind of didn't realize how much I skimmed over some parts. But something I also want to add is that the characters, just the good characters, don't also only apply to the final girls. It also applies to guys as well. I mean, Ash Williams, the freaking dude from They Live, I think his name's Nada or something. They never say his name pretty much. And another great example is, of course, Roger from Night of the Demons. Here's a little example.
You won't get me!
The thing is, 80s horror doesn't even matter what gender the final character is. It's usually one, sometimes two people that are the last remaining in the overall group that it starts out in. They just do so well at making the characters progress themselves through the movie. And it's not all just oh yeah, I'm the best person in the world and I can do all this and no problem. It just doesn't, you can't really relate to the character like that, and it just makes them annoying when there's no change, It's the whole static and dynamic character difference thing, if you guys get what I'm saying there.
The last topic I'll be covering is something I feel like the world can't go without. Music. Music is not only great to listen to, but it's crucial to set the mood in a horror movie. If you want to set people on edge, you gotta have a scary soundtrack, filled with ominous and loud sudden instruments. Take this song, Jason Downstairs to Barn, from the 1982 film Friday the 13th by Harry Manfredini. This kind of music can be really great at adding tension in a horror movie, making the chase scenes or attacks just that much more scary. Also, I love how they sync some of the moments in the movie with the music. That's just awesome. Now, me personally, I am a sucker for music and soundtracks in movies. However, a lot of soundtracks today, in my opinion, just aren't exactly memorable or impactful in films. Mostly from what I've seen, it's just taking an old song and slowing it down so it sounds creepy, which isn't exactly original, and it is very repetitive now. And yes, I do know movies today do still make their own soundtracks that are original, but 80s movies just take the cake. I mean, there are so many iconic themes from movies of that time that I understand would be hard to compete against. John Williams was making song after song of just pure magic with how memorable they were. You hear the first three notes and you already know what movie is about to start. I also understand that some movies may not have much of a soundtrack, especially in horror, to help build suspense. To me, I don't really mind just as long as it actually works and sounds better without music. Like in the 1974 film Black Christmas. Perfect example of a movie not using a soundtrack in suspenseful moments. That stuff is just eerie. And yeah, I know this is a 70s horror movie, but it's underrated, so I had to put that in. And also, little fun fact, I'm pretty sure this was the first horror movie to have, like, the kind of thing where, like, the killer's calling from in the house. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course. Correct me if I'm wrong. But, yeah, so that's pretty freaking cool. Overall, to put it simply, modern horror just doesn't hold up as well as horror from the 1980s. Could it be a nostalgia factor? Sure. But even then, comparing each topic I chose, you could see a fair amount of differences. With fitting quality, a forbidden feel, less media coverage, practical effects, cheesy yet fun characters, and great soundtracks, it's clear why 80s horror is so iconic. Not to dog too much on modern horror, but in a way some of it really lacks that passion that older movies of the genre show so clearly. Sure, you can still use practical effects and try to really focus on the vibes of an 80s film, but no matter what, it won't hit the same. We've come a long way since then, and whether or not it's really better than the 80s is up for you or anyone else to decide. You all know what I think, so let me know how you think in the comments if you have anything else to add. Like I said in the intro, this is really just a fun and slightly criticizing video I wanted to make in honor of such a cool decade. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe if I ever decide to do other videos about this stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a good day or night.